"Look at that relic," Corporal Evans sneered. His voice a low, mocking rasp meant for his friends but loud enough to carry on the dry desert wind. The old man brought a museum piece to the range. Probably thinks he's still storming the beaches of Iwo Jima. His companions, two other young Marines sculpted by modern training and bursting with unearned confidence, chuckled in unison. The old man they were watching didn't flinch. He just kept shuffling forward, his worn-out boots scuffing the dirt, carrying a rifle that looked as old and tired as he did. The disrespect was a physical thing, a thick, suffocating cloud of youthful arrogance. They saw a stooped, overweight senior citizen in a faded flannel shirt, not a warrior. They saw a joke. They were about to learn that some legends don't wear a uniform. If you believe true honor is eternal, type honor in the comments. His name was Arthur Jenkins, though no one had called him that in 50 years. To the few who remembered, he was simply Art at 72. The world saw him as a relic of a bygone era. His body, once a finely tuned instrument of war, was now softened by time and gravity. A pronounced limp favored his left leg, a permanent souvenir from a place and time he rarely spoke of. He lived a quiet life in a small, unassuming house, his days marked by routine and the comfortable silence of solitude. But once a year, on the anniversary of a day that was seared into his soul, he would uncase persistence. It wasn't a museum piece. It was a promise, a memorial forged of walnut wood and blued steel. Today was that day, and he had come to this advanced Marine Corps rifle range, having pulled a string with an old friend to get a single lane for a single hour to fulfill his annual ritual. The three young corporals had just finished their qualification, peppering targets at 500 yards with their sleek, black M4 carbines, complete with advanced optics and ergonomic grips. They were the tip of the spear, the modern embodiment of the Marine Corps, and they knew it. They swaggered back from the firing line, chests puffed out, laughing about their tight groupings. That's when they saw Art. He was methodically setting up his station, moving with a deliberate slowness that they mistook for frailty. He laid a worn canvas mat on the ground, the fabric faded to the color of dust. From a long, leather-bound case that looked like it had survived a dozen wars, he produced his rifle. It was a monstrosity in their eyes. A heavy wooden stock, scarred and dark with age and oil, was mated to a long, thick barrel. A vintage, long-tube scope was mounted on top, held in place by thick, unrefined steel rings. It looked cobbled together, an ugly, cumbersome beast of a weapon compared to their lightweight, modular service rifles. "Seriously, what is that thing?" One of the Marines, a kid named Diaz, whispered. "Is that a hunting rifle? Did Grandpa get lost on his way to bag a deer?" Corporal Evans, the ringleader, sauntered closer, his boots crunching on the gravel with performative authority. "Hey, Pop," he called out, a smirk playing on his lips. "You sure you're in the right place? This is a military range. We shoot targets past 100 yards here." Art didn't look up. He continued his work, his large, surprisingly steady hands checking the rifle's action. The fluid, practiced motion was lost on the young men. All they saw was an old man fumbling with an ancient weapon. "I'm where I need to be, son," Art said, his voice a low rumble, quiet but clear. The word son seemed to ignite Evans's arrogance. "It's Corporal Old-Timer, and that piece of junk isn't going to reach the backstop, let alone the target. You need a spotter? I can tell you where the dirt kicks up when you miss." The insult hung in the air, sharp and cruel. The range safety officer, a young sergeant, watched from a distance, a look of mild annoyance on his face. He'd seen old vets come out before, wanting to relive their glory days. He figured he'd let the old man take his shot, miss, and then gently ask him to clear the lane. It was easier than arguing. Art ignored them. He reached into a small pouch and pulled out a single cartridge. It was long and heavy, the brass dull with age, the bullet a custom-machined piece of lead and copper. He slid it into the chamber with a practiced, almost tender motion, the bolt closing with a solid, definitive clack that seemed to absorb all the ambient sound. He settled himself onto the mat, his large frame surprisingly graceful as he assumed a perfect prone position. The rifle seemed to become an extension of his body, the worn stock fitting into the curve of his shoulder as if it had been molded there. He was no longer a stooped old man. He was a rock, an immovable part of the landscape. The Marines watched, their mockery turning into a kind of morbid curiosity. This was going to be pathetic, and they wanted a front-row seat. The target was a small steel plate, barely visible to the naked eye, set at a staggering 1,200 yards. It was a distance reserved for the most elite snipers with the most advanced equipment. For this old man with his wooden cannon, it was an impossibility. Just as Art's finger began to tighten on the trigger, a cloud of dust announced the arrival of a Humvee. It pulled up behind the firing line with an authoritative screech of brakes. The door opened and out stepped a man who commanded immediate respect. He was a gunnery sergeant, his uniform crisp, his face a roadmap of hard-won experience. On his collar, the nameplate read, Sullivan. The three corporals instinctively straightened their posture. Gunny Sullivan's eyes swept the range, and he was about to bark at the range officer when he saw the scene. The three cocky corporals standing over a prone, elderly civilian. Then his eyes fell on the rifle. He froze. His gaze narrowed, and the hard lines on his face softened into something else entirely. Disbelief, then reverence. He started walking, his pace slow and deliberate, his eyes locked on the strange, old weapon. The corporals, seeing their gunny approach, snapped to a rigid position of attention. As you were, Gunny Sullivan said, his voice a low growl, but his attention was elsewhere. He walked right past them and stopped just behind Art, who remained focused downrange, his breathing slow and even. The gunny didn't speak to Art. He spoke to the rifle. My God, he breathed, the sound barely a whisper. I've only ever seen drawings of it. Persistence. Corporal Evans, emboldened by a foolish sense of familiarity, dared to speak. It's just some old junk, Gunny. We were just... Shut your mouth, Corporal, Sullivan snapped, his voice like cracking ice. He never took his eyes off Art and the rifle. You have no idea what you're looking at. You have no idea who you're speaking to. He crouched down, his movements showing a deep respect for the space around the shooter. He spoke softly now, his voice filled with an awe that completely bewildered the younger Marines. Sir? Is that you? Arthur Jenkins. Art slowly turned his head, his calm eyes meeting the gunny's. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. Gunny, he acknowledged. Gunny Sullivan's face was a mask of profound respect. He rose to his full height and turned to face the three stunned corporals. His voice was no longer loud, but it carried an intensity that made the air crackle. You see this man? He asked, his voice dangerously quiet. This old-timer? This man is a living legend in the scout sniper community. A ghost. Most of us thought he was just a story they told us at Pendleton to make us shoot straight. He pointed a rigid finger at the rifle. And that is not a piece of junk, that is the M40 he used in Vietnam. The one they call Persistence, the one he used in the A Shau Valley in 68-inch. The corporals' faces had gone from smug to confused to pale white. The A Shau Valley. Even they, generations removed, knew the name. It was a place of ghosts and nightmares. A chapter of Marine Corps history written in blood. In Operation Whispering Death, the gunny continued, his voice taking on the cadence of a historian reciting scripture. A 5-man recon team was pinned down, compromised, with an entire NVA battalion closing in. They were wounded, out of ammo, and their radio was shot to hell. No air support, no evac. It was a death sentence. He paused, letting the weight of the words sink in. For 3 days this man, Corporal Jenkins back then, held them off. Alone. His team was down. He was wounded, shot in the leg. But he had this rifle. He had 10 rounds. And he had a mission. The gunny's eyes were distant, seeing another time, another place. The NVA had a commander, a brutal officer who was coordinating the assault. He was hiding in a bunker complex over 1,000 yards away, across a valley, shielded by jungle. Taking him out was impossible. The shot was impossible. He turned his piercing gaze back to the three young men, who now looked as if they wanted the earth to swallow them whole. Jenkins had one round left, his last one. He'd been lying in the mud for 72 hours, bleeding, dehydrated. But he waited. He waited for the one moment the commander stepped out of his bunker. He calculated for wind, for humidity, for the spin of the earth. He accounted for the antique scope on his rifle being knocked out of alignment. He held his breath, and he fired one shot. One shot from 1,247 yards. One shot that traveled through triple canopy jungle and found its mark. The gunny looked at Art, his voice thick with emotion. That one shot threw the entire enemy battalion into chaos, long enough for a rescue chopper, which had been searching blindly, to spot their signal and get the survivors out. He saved 4 Marines with one impossible bullet. An absolute, deafening silence fell over the range. The desert wind itself seemed to be holding its breath. The story was so immense, so legendary, it felt unreal. But the proof was lying right there on the dusty ground. Art Jenkins, the ghost of a Shao Valley, had come back. Without a word, Art turned his attention back to the scope. His body was still a monument of focus. He exhaled slowly, his fingers squeezing the trigger with infinite patience. The rifle didn't crack like their M4S. It boomed, a deep, thunderous roar that echoed off the distant mountains. The recoil, which would have shattered a lesser man's shoulder, was absorbed by his frame as if he were part of the earth itself. For a long second, there was nothing. Then, a faint, high-pitched ping traveled back across the vast distance. A tiny metallic sound that was the loudest thing any of them had ever heard. Perfect hit. Art pushed himself up slowly, his joints groaning in protest. He broke open the action, and the single, spent brass casing ejected, glinting in the sun before landing softly in the dust. His annual ritual was complete. His promise to the men who didn't make it home was kept. Gunny Sullivan stared at the distant target, then at Art, shaking his head in wonder. He turned to the 3 corporals, his face a granite mask of fury and disappointment. "On your feet," he commanded. His voice was low, but it carried the weight of the entire Marine Corps. "You will go over there. You will address this Marine as Sir. You will apologize for your ignorance, for your disrespect, and for shaming the uniform you wear. You are not fit to stand in this man's shadow. Move." Like chastened children, the 3 Marines marched over to Art, their swagger completely gone, replaced by a deep, burning shame. Corporal Evans stood before the old man, his eyes fixed on the ground. "Sir," he stammered, his voice cracking, We apologize. There's no excuse for our behavior. We were wrong. It was an honor to watch you shoot." "Sir," the other 2 mumbled their own mortified apologies. Art looked at them, his eyes holding no anger, only a profound weariness and a flicker of something else, pity. "The uniform doesn't make the man," he said, his voice soft. "It just reveals him. Remember that. Respect is earned in silence, not shouted in arrogance." He bent down and picked up the warm shell casing, closing his fist around it. He gave them a final nod and began to pack his rifle, his movements once again slow and methodical. The story of Art Jenkins's return to the range spread like wildfire through the base. The 3 corporals were assigned to a month of mess duty, but their real punishment was the memory of their own ignorance. They were changed. They started looking at the older veterans they met not as relics, but as libraries of unwritten history. A new rule was implemented at the range. Any veteran was to be afforded the highest degree of courtesy, their stories listened to, their presence honored. The change was small, but it was real. The tale became a new legend, a lesson passed down from Gunny Sullivan to his NCOs, and from them to their junior Marines. It was a story about how the greatest warriors are often hidden in plain sight, their greatness measured not by the sharpness of their uniform, but by the weight of the silence they command. The final image was always the same. A quiet old man, alone on a dusty range, making an impossible shot with a rifle named Persistence, proving that true honor never fades. It just waits patiently for its moment to be remembered. If you believe every veteran deserves our respect, subscribe to this channel. Their stories are our history.